Hello there, and welcome back to our online book study of Richard Rohr's Eager to Love. I am so happy that you are back with me. So it may be you and me going through this book, or maybe you have a group that you have brought together. At any rate, I love that we are going through this together because sometimes it helps to know that there's someone else out there who is reading the same books as you are. I've found over the years that I will get on a path, a journey, wanting to learn more about God, and sometimes I have to do it solo. I've experienced that for a couple different reasons. Either because I'm a military wife, I deploy many times along with my husband, and so I find myself in a situation where I don't have someone close by that I can kind of be on the same journey with. Or it just may be a season in my life where I'm home because it's just necessary for my family, or at the current moment, I am self-employed, and so I use this time to just challenge myself to continue to grow and move in my faith and understanding and relationship with God. So for those of you who might be new here, we are going through an online book discussion of the book Eager to Love by Richard Rohr, and it is a study of St. Francis of Assisi's life, but it's also a call to action for those in the Christian church that maybe have never experienced this idea of mysticism and a personal walk with God, a hearing from God, not just in your typical ways of through your priest or your pastor or your minister, but through reading the Bible yourself, through walking in nature, through communing with nature, through art, through creativity, through music. And so this is just an opportunity for you to start to challenge maybe the way you've been taught. We are in chapter 3, entitled Living on the Edge of the Inside, Simplicity and Justice. And the subtitle of that chapter is A Simple Way to Live. We're going to be reading through pages 33 through 40. And then what I will do is I will read the study discussion questions, but I will also have a link down in the show notes for you to go and get a copy of the show notes and print them for free. And you can do them on your own, or again, you can do them as a discussion either with friends or your community, your church group, whoever you'd like to speak with about these sorts of things. So let's get started. This simple way of life, on the edge of the inside, offered a radically different perspective about the meaning of church itself. The holding of church offices and public church roles came later for friars, but not for Franciscan sisters, should we say thank God. These two dropouts from 13th century Assisi society found a place of structural freedom, and then inside of that also found personal, mental, and emotional freedom, although I am not sure which came first. To be both outside these social and ecclesiastical systems and free from negativity and ego within ourselves could well be a definition of full gospel freedom. And at the core of the biblical tradition of the poor of Yahweh, this was again strongly rediscovered in the 20th century in many liberation theologians and their preferential option for the poor. Today, most of us try to find personal and individual freedom, even as we may remain inside of structural boxes and an entire system of consumption that we are then unable or unwilling to critique. Our mortgages, luxuries, and chosen lifestyles control our whole future. Whoever is paying our bills and giving us security and status determines what we can and cannot say, or even what we can or cannot think. You cannot remove the plank that you are standing on. Self-serving institutions that give us our security, status, or identity are almost always considered too big to fail and are invariably beyond any honest critique for the vast majority of people. and thus corruption grows. The way of radical Christianity is simply to stay outside of such systems so they cannot control your breadth of thinking, feeling, loving, and living out universal justice. Only some contemporary prophets like Dorothy Day have had the courage to name the world as a dirty, rotten system. When Jesus and John's Gospel used the term the world, they did not mean the earth, creation, or civilization, which Jesus clearly came to love and save. They were referring to the idolatrous systems and institutions that are invariably self-referential and always passing away. It is very similar to what the Buddhist way speaks of all things as empty. This dirty, rotten system that Dorothy dismisses is the very one Francis and Clare avoided. When Francis said after kissing the leper, "I left the world," he was saying that he was giving up on the usual payoffs, constraints, and rewards of business as usual, and was choosing to live in the largest kingdom of all. To pray and actually mean "Thy kingdom come," we must also be able to say, "My kingdoms go." At best, most Christians split their loyalties between God and Caesar, but Francis and Clare did not. Their first citizenship was always and in every case elsewhere, which ironically allowed them to live in this world with joy, detachment, and freedom. The gifts of the simple life. We can summarize the transformative gifts of leaving the world in these ways. When you agree to live simply, you put yourself outside of others' ability to pay you off, reward you falsely, or control you by money, salary, status, punishment, or loss or gain of anything. This is the most radical level of freedom, but of course it is not easy to come by. It might be called foundational restorative justice or primal solidarity with the mass of humanity in the earth. Francis and Clare created a life in which they had little to lose, no desire for gain, no loans or debts to pay off, and no luxuries that they needed or wanted. Most of us can only envy them. When you agree to live simply, you have little to protect and no desire for acquisition, even for acquisition of any moral capital. If you imagine you are better, holier, higher, more important to God than others, it is a very short trip to justified arrogance or violence toward those others. In fact, it is almost inevitable. And this is why so many say that the history of low-level religion and the history of violence are the same history. If you eliminate such manufactured and desired superiority, religion can finally become nonviolent in thought, word, and deed. Francis and Clare were masters at it, and so nonviolence came quite naturally to them and to the early movement they spawned. When you agree to live simply, you understand what Francis meant when he said, "A brother has not given up all things if he holds on to the purse of his own opinions." Most of us find out that this purse is far more dangerous and disguised than a money purse, and we seldom let go of it. And when you agree to live simply, you do not consider the immigrant, the refugee, the homeless person, or the foreigner as a threat to you or see them as being in competition with you. You have chosen their marginal state for yourself, freely and consciously becoming visitors and pilgrims in the world, as Francis put it. A simple lifestyle is quite simply an act of solidarity with the way most people have lived since the beginning of humanity. It is thus restorative justice instead of the world's limited notion of retributive justice. When you voluntarily agree to live simply, you do not need to get into the frenzy of work for the sake of salary, or the ability to buy non-essentials or raise your social standing. You enjoy the freedom of not climbing. You might climb for others, but not just for yourself. The involuntary poor, of course, must seek to climb at least a bit beyond survival all of their lives, and these are the ones who need our assistance and support. When you agree to live simply, you have time for spiritual and corporal works of mercy, because you have renegotiated in your mind and heart your very understanding of time and its purposes. Time is not money anymore, despite the common aphorism. Time is life itself. When you agree to live simply, you can easily find a natural solidarity with all people on the edge and the bottom, the excluded, the shamed, and the forgotten, because you stop idealizing the climb and finally realize there isn't a top anyway. When you agree to live simply, you have little energy to circle the wagons around your group, your ethnicity, your country, your money, your religion. Your circle is no longer defined by these external and accidental qualities, because you are now finding joy of the real essentials and the actual center. And like all beauty, it is mostly inside. When you agree to live simply, all the ideologicalisms lose their pull and attraction. Consumerism, classism, sexism, capitalism, ageism, lookism, communism, patriotism, fascism, even addiction, because they are all based on what John calls disordered desire, lust of the eyes, pride and possession, and based on a world that is passing away. As Pope Francis always says, reality is more important than our ideas about reality. And what are mere conceptual elaborations which finally mask reality from itself? Last couple paragraphs. When you agree to live simply, the ethics and economics of war reveal themselves in all their evil and stupidity. Some say security systems, weapons, and armies actually demand 80% of the world's resources, and everything else is made to fall into place behind that. How could that possibly be the will of God? Wars are initiated by imperial thinking. Only people intent on their own protection and their own material advantage need wars and war economies. A Christian can only tolerate clearly defensive attempts to protect the defenseless and the innocent. War must be the very last resort after all other means have truly been tried. When you agree to live simply, people cease to be possessions and objects for your consumption or use. Your lust for relationships or for others to serve you, your need for other people's admiration, your desire to use other people as a kind of commodity for your personal pleasure, or any need to control and manipulate other people slowly, yes, very slowly, falls away. When you agree to live simply, there is no long-standing basis for any kind of addiction. You are free to enjoy, but you never let any enjoyment become your master. You practice non-addiction every day by letting go, not needing, and not desiring anything in particular. Fasting, detachment, and simplicity were the original words for non-addiction in the spiritual traditions. Yes, it is no exaggeration to say that Francis and Clare found a way out of the system, and a way that worked joyfully besides. But it's also demanded that they first change in fundamental ways, rather than, as it is so often the case now, that it is always others who need to change. And we should never undercut or fail to support such needed prophecy. Sometimes it's necessary to rail against injustice, however, and we should never undercut or fail to support such needed prophecy, especially when it is done in the nonviolent spirit of Jesus. But instances of true and full prophetic witness are somewhat rare, in my opinion. We often settle for just liberal or conservative politics. That's a lot to think about, friends. When you go to the PDF, you'll notice that I only have about 2 or 3 questions because every segment just holds so much. And what I hope is that these are just starting points of questions. And maybe you look at the questions and you have different questions that come up, right? So my aim is just to give you a jumping off point. These conversations can take place in any form, in person, Marco Polo, WhatsApp. I mean, that's the beauty of the time that we live in, right? So I'm just so grateful that you want to be a part of the change that we want to see in the world, starting with ourselves. So here are the questions for this section. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to you to have inner freedom? Outer freedom? And then where do the two ideals overlap for you? What would it look like in your life to live on the edge of the structures that also support this type of radical Christianity? And what would it look like for you to climb for others rather than yourself? Give a specific example of something you could do right now. All right, thank you so much for stopping by. The next time we're together, we're going to jump into chapter 4. And so I look forward to sharing more of this story and this conversation.